Today, the special session is meant to encourage their philosophical reflection and creative presentation on their own areas of interest. It is a platform to explore their content knowledge and to strengthen their confidence in presenting a paper, and it will be a platform to explore their creativity and to stand before others as a speaker and extempore speaker. Today, we have with us four participants from different universities of our country. They are Mr. Abhinnshyam Tiwari from the University of Lucknow, Mr. Anupam Chaudhary from Jadavpur University, Ms. Smritimai Basantia from Begunia College, an affiliated college of Utkal University, and Ms. Kashmira Murmu from Ravenshaw University. I extend a hearty welcome to all the participants of today's session. They have been given 10 minutes time for presentation and 20 minutes time for interaction. We have with us the eminent professors like Dr. Ranjit Ghosh, Dr. Paresh Chandra Dasha, Dr. Anup Rai, and Dr. K. Umnaran Rao as the esteemed judges. Some have joined and some are yet to join in the session. And today I can see the faces of the senior professors of the country, Professor Avinash, Professor Jayanti, Professor Anurai, Professor Ranjit Ghosh, and others. I extend my hearty regards to them, and with this, once again, I hearty welcome to all the participants and professors across the country and abroad. Today, our first participant is Mr. Abhinnshyam, research scholar, University of Lucknow. Its topic is the absolute and identity statements, and he is doing research under the guidance of Dr. Prashant Kumar Shukla. I welcome Mr. Tiwari and request him to present his paper. Over to Mr. Abhinnshyam Tiwari of University of Lucknow.
Thank you, sir. And it is a privilege to present my paper into one of the most famous philosophical exposition in India right now. So this paper is an attempt to develop the idea of how the Fregean notion of sense and reference can be used on the statement Tattvam Asi, and consequently show how one can realize the synonymity of Brahman with Atman, assuming that both the terms are referring to the same object factually, and like the realization of morning star and the evening star, which is done by perception, can be realized by specific means of knowledge. Now, Gottlob Frege is considered as one of the biggest figures in analytical philosophical tradition for either of the two things. First, his famous work, Begriff Shift, in which he has attempted to describe the basic concepts of mathematics through the laws of logic. And second, which is the major focus of this paper, the theory of meaning, which is given in his work, Sense and Reference, which is also developed and commented upon the 20th century famous philosophers like Wittgenstein and Quine. Now, Frege at the outset of this essay asked the question that is identity a relation? And if it is a relation between objects, or names or signs of objects. The problem as shown in Begrish shift is what is being dealt here. If we take identity to be a relation between objects, we are led into a paradox. Now, the classic example given in this regard is that of the morning star and the evening star, the two terms referring to the same object, that is the planet Venus, also known as Hesperus and Phosphorus. Now, the issue is that if we take identity to be a relation between objects, the external references, we are led to assert that there is no new information gained when we assert Hesperus is phosphorus, just like when we assert Hesperus is Hesperus, because the later one or the former one refer to the same linguistic content. And if we take meaning to be the external object, we would lead into the paradox that would say that the statement Hesperus and phosphorus and the statement Hesperus is Hesperus is both non-informative, tautological, and analytic. Now, Frege develops his notion of sense and reference to know, to show us that it is possible to know Hesperus is Hesperus without knowing that Hesperus is phosphorus, as it is possible to know A equals to A without knowing that A equals to B. Now I've shown this paradox in a somewhat nutshell manner on the screen of my presentation, which is being dealt here. Now, Frege advocates the difference between the reference of the sign, that is the object denoted by the sign, and the sense of the sign. Frege's definition of the sense is not that clear, and we can only access this definition through his one-liner definition in his paper, which I quote: sense is the mode of presentation of that which is designated, quote unquote. Now, the relationship between a referent and its sense is, I quote again, of such a kind that to sign there corresponds a definite sense, and to that in turn a definite referent, while to a given referent there may be one or more signs, quote unquote. Now, so there are signs and references, sense and references of sentences too. Frege says that sense of a sentence is a thought contained by it, and the referent is the truth value of the sentence. And thought, according to Frege, and I quote, is not the subjective performance of thinking, but its objective content, which is capable of being the common property of several thinkers, quote unquote. Though we'll not look forward to illuminate the niceties and subtleties in this application theory of linguistic form, it will only suffice us to know that for Frege, there can also be signs of signs, which will lead us to distinguish between a customary sign and a customary referent, and an indirect sign and an indirect referent. Now, after a clear and very concise exposition of this theory, I would like to put a fair and summary of the nature of Brahm according to Advaita Vedanta especially, while keeping in mind that to define it only for the sake of the application of this theory. The crux of Advaita Vedanta theory is found in Shankara's work, Brahma Gyan Valimala, which is said that Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jiva Brahmyo Na Paraha. And Shankar again, in his Brahma Sutra, describes Brahm as, I quote, Brahm is that whose nature is permanent purity, intelligence and freedom. That is, Nitya Suddha Buddha Mukta Swabhavam Brahmeti. It transcends speech and mind, does not fall within the category of the object, and constitutes the inward self of all. Of this Brahm, our text denies all plurality of forms, quote unquote. Brahm is assumed to be foundational, though it is in no sense a substance. The Shastras are only real till the Brahm is not realized by the seeker of Atma Vidya. Human mind realizes its own limitations. Thus, when a person attains Brahmanubhav, he attains the higher or the Parabrahm. As Max Muller, in his 3 lectures of Vedanta philosophy, gives us an account of Shankara's attempt to clarify this distinction between Para and Aparabrahm, which I quote again. When Brahm is described in the Upanishads by the negative words only, after excluding all the differences of name and form due to nascence, that is the higher Brahm. But when he is described by such terms as the intelligent whose body consists of a spirit, whose body is light, and etc., that is the lower Brahm or the Ishvara, quote unquote. Now it seems that there are 3 different ways, 3 different descriptions which can be ascribed to knowing the Brahm. The first being the eternal and pure I, the Atman. The second being Ishwar or Parabrahm, which is the lower upper Brahm, which is the lower Brahm, which is, according to Radhakrishnan, the best possible image under our present conditions of knowledge. And the third is the attributeless Nirgun, Nisprapanch, and Sadasat Vilakshan Brahm, which cannot be ascribed in any language rather than a perpetual no. As I quote Copplestone, that there is only one infinite system, but it can be known and looked at from different point of views, quote unquote. Now it seems fairly that the identity statement Tattvam Asi is as much similar to that of Morning Star is the Evening Star or Samuel Clemens is Mark Twain, because all three of these assert identities between the two senses and which have their reference as the same object. And for the moment that it is assumed that all three statements have reference which can be known or perceived by one way or the other. Now we have so far been acquainted with this distinction of sense and reference and the nature of Atman. We saw in the first section that Hesperus is phosphorus and Hesperus is both in different senses. Tattvam too can refer to the same object, that is the absolute, while having two different modes of presentation, that is the Atman and the Brahman, in the very narrow sense of the term. The other four great teachings like Aham Atma Brahma, Pragyanam Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi, etc., recapitulate the same point. Now it is our matter to provide a substantial option to experience this identity between Brahm and Atman where meaning is denotation. Now the traditional way is Shruti, which is the only way advocated in the Brahma Sutra to know the absolute Brahma, as we see Sankara saying in his Brahma Sutra again, Tat tu samamvayat, that is, but that Brahma is to be known only from the scriptures and not independently by any means other established, because it is the main purport of all the Vedanta texts, quote unquote. However, this article differs from Shankara's main attempts to explain the ways to know Brahma, for one can also find another interpretation, an act of apprehension to know Brahma, which I term as moksha. The moksha seems a very unhappy term as its connotation must be uncomfortably narrowed down to act only as a description of a kind of an act of apprehension. Yet we find that the term is not totally unrelated to this sort of use, as we see that moksha is founded on Atmagyan, which is the knowledge of the self. As I cite Shankara, that moksha pratibandha vitri matram ev atmagyanasya phalam. This knowledge is objective, just like Frege's concept of thought, and it does not depend on the mind, but on the existing fact that I quote Sankara again from his Brahma Sutra, Brahma Jnanam Vastu Tantram, quote unquote. It must be said that the referent, that is the Brahma, once known, does not abolish the sense of duality. Just like when we know the morning star and the evening star refer to the same object, we do not abolish their senses. Jyate dattam na vidyate. To quote Radhakrishnan, we see the same appearance, but give a different value to it. Now, since Brahma is present everywhere, within everything, and is a self of everything, it is altogether impossible that it should ever be the goal of process of going, for we do not go what is already reached. Experience tells us that the person goes to something from himself, something outside of himself. It is now that moksha need not be a newly attained power to perceive supernaturally than we do otherwise. It could be just said and considered as a shift in our perspective to look at the same thing, but from a different point of view. The same act of apprehension which after our knowledge of identity between morning star and the evening star allowed us to view the planet Venus differently can be said to analogously be similar to knowing the identity between Brahm and Atman, which are understood to be different before. To take a passage from Hiryanna's popular essays, and I quote, the end sought may be already there, yet we may not be able to get at it, owing to some obstacle or the other. To take a typical example, but a trivial example, a person may be so much beside himself as to set about searching for his eyeglasses while he is actually wearing them. Here, attainment consists in the person in question overcoming the delusion into which he has fallen, either by being appraised of the fact by someone else or coming to himself to know it, quote unquote. Now, moksha as an apprehension is a twofold act of denying and affirming. Denying the difference between the absolute Brahm and the individual Atman, and affirming the identity, the Tadatmaya between the two, removing the nescience or the avidya. This shift in our view can then be a sight of the differenceless and unlimited Brahm, which is now a very simpler approach toward identity, because one can know the similarity of the Atman and Brahman by being told by any authority like a guru or a teaching of Shruti on whom the seeker has an unwavering faith. To quote Radhakrishnan, to us from our limited point of view, the soul with its outlook confined to the body, the senses and the mind is the real, and the liberated soul is an abstract entity. Now, the apparent inability of various people to communicate precisely with one another regarding the topics about God, Atman, and Brahman may justly be ascribed on the non essential or reason oriented characteristics. It would now be an effort, now be a completely different attempt to perform an Occam's razor to retain the most commonly held senses for this referent from the senses subjected to an individual. But a paper of this length and a presentation of this duration does not allow us to do so. It would then be that the senses describing an indescribable reality are an effort to go beyond the bounds of language. And the paper and the presentation should only be looked as an attempt to clarify the semantical meanings of the words attributed to the absolute. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, thanks so much, Mr. Abhinnshyam Tiwari, for your a beautiful presentation on the theme, the absolute and the identity statements. And you have very beautifully given the identity crisis, and you have given the observation of Monistar and Abhinnshyam, and try to have your observation on the crisis of identity. And you have also quoted the discussion made by Max Muller regarding uh, the para and the apara, the identity of Atma and the para. And you also refer to Shruti, the only way to know the absolute Brahma. And you have given your observation that how knowledge is objective, like Frege's concept of thought and Brahma Jnanam Vastu Tantra. And you have also taken the concept of moksha on the twofold act of denying and offering, and our limited knowledge gives different views on the identity crisis. And may I request Dr. K. Omnan Rao to carry on the discussion. Okay, Dr. Rao, are you there?
Yes, sir. In a while, I'm joining. Just a minute. Bear with me. Namaskar and good evening, everybody. Well, I'm stuck up in the rain and just reached home. Well, I did not listen to what Abhinnshyam Tiwari presented. Well, we have with us Dr. Anup Rai and others, Kailas Das sir, and even Ranjit Ghosh sir. Well, I request at first Professor Ranjit Ghosh sir to open up with asking some questions or having observations on the presentation made by.
Hello. 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 Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Audible, sir. Audible, sir. Yes,
Well
sir.
and loud, sir. Mr. Tiwari has given, we must thank him because he's working on this, that he is trying to bring out the absolute and identity statements. This was his way, and probably as I could follow him, that that Brahman is the reality he is taking as an absolute in his absolute sense, and there is an identity between Jiva and Brahman, that is the identity statement. And this too, probably he is trying to bring the Freudian concept of morning star and evening star, the identity of morning star and evening star, and is trying to establish the identity of Atman and Brahman. Well, is it the fact, Mr. Tiwari?
Yes, sir.
Yes. All right. Then the thing is, when we are discussing of sense and reference, sense doesn't have any physical existence, but reference is always having. Now, in this context, what would you, how you do mention Brahman, which is having no physical existence, and we just take it and in the way in which we make it a reference point. So how do you react to this?
Sir, when I was attempting to write this paper, I thought that this Freudian notion of sense and reference applies only to semantical meanings. That is why in my presentation, I took to your observation that Tattvam Asi here, I should not, and I could not, as an analytical inclined philosopher, could not describe and ascribe a metaphysical correlation to it. It is a linguistic statement which is to be meaningful, if to be meaningful, can be taken as a Freudian sense and reference theory. That's what my main aim was.
All right, thank you. So you can take it as from the semantical point of view and
Yes,
not
sir.
from the metaphysical point of view. Well and good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. May I request Dr. Kailash Das sir for his observations and any questions thereof. Dr. Kailash Das sir. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, Kailash Das sir.
Huh.
Well, yes, sir. Sir, namaskar, sir. Sir, namaskar.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir, you're audible, sir. Audible, sir.
Namaskar, namaskar. Okay. I could listen, and because it is a very briefly presented, so it has to be a bit sketchy. But anyway, I could go through this, and I am reminded of Professor Kalyan Bagchi when he made an analysis of I am Aham Brahmasmi. You are referring to Tattvamasi, but he has analyzed the Aham Brahmasmi in a similar way that you have tried to say. And he said that I here, I am Brahman, the I here, he means to say this is I is a semantic I. So who is there? Oh, it is me here. I am here. Okay. In that sense, Professor Bagchi had argued to a great length about this. When you are talking about I am Brahman, this I is identical with Brahman. This is the semantic I, which is identical with Brahman. But when you are taking reference from you are giving the example of the morning star and the evening star, and the meaning is not same, but they refer to one and the same thing, that is the planet Venus. So, but the meaning is different here. Actually, are we going to extend this type of identity, which we call in Sanskrit Abhinna? Abhinna is a numerical identity. When we are using the word Abhinna in the sense of identity, this is a numerical identity. Here it is a numerical identity to which it refers. When we are talking about reference and identity, it is a numerical identity. But when we are talking about senses, the senses are different and not identical. Right? I will try to understand you in the context of Professor Bagchi only, that this is the semantic I. Are you going to say similar thing or something else? That's what my doubt actually.
No, that was
I got a query.
Yes, sir. That was the correct interpretation of yours. As this paper is a great length, it is a 14 pages paper, so I couldn't argue the whole thing, because then I tried to exposit the Freudian notion of sense and reference, and I tried to recapitulate the point, reiterate it, that this is a semantical identity. I'm not referring to any metaphysical thing.
Right. The scope of this paper is very limited because it's bound to be very sketchy. But yes, if you have elaborated, I would like to go through it. But a very good attempt, and there is a lot of novelty in it, as I find, and very fresh. And why you have not taken Tattvamasi, not Aham Brahmasmi?
Because Aham Brahmasmi, sir, I couldn't find some Aham Brahmasmis. Practically, I couldn't find Aham Brahmasmis used that much in our daily life. And plus,
Right.
Aham Brahmasmi refers to some Jahad Lakshan type of thing, because Aham here is the Atman in the Jeev. So that would take us very Kripkean notion of the term, that my Atman is essential to me in all possible worlds, and that Atman which is essential to me refers to the Brahm, is the same as Brahm. So that thing takes us away from the semantical theory which Frege used to the semantical theory which Kripke used. I thought that, sir.
Okay, okay, carry on, carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Well, may I invite now Dr. Anup Rai, then we'll go with others. Dr. Anup Rai.
Yes,
Sir, namaskar.
Mr. Tiwari. Namaste, namaste. Mr. Tiwari, you have a very well thought out and well articulated presentation. I should congratulate you for such a beautiful presentation. But I have a problem. What I felt is that it's a small article because due to paucity of time, you couldn't elaborate, isn't it? But
Yes.
Your article is loaded with too much of quotations. Rather, you, instead of giving quotations, you give your own views. Those things, those ideas presented in the quotations, you may give your own ideas, but quoting too much doesn't give a very, you can understand. It feels as if you are quoting to just fill up the vacuum. So just take care of it. You have a very bright future as a fill. And congratulations for this paper. Best of luck.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Well, anybody, sir? Avinash Srivastav, sir? Anybody? Anything to say? Well, I am not commenting or asking anything to Mr. Tiwari because I did not listen to what he said actually because I was not there. So, yes, Avinash, sir. Welcome, sir. Namaskar, sir. Welcome.
No, it is a very nice presentation. I must go in a better way. In the sense, he has told me what is the difference between Aham Brahmasmi and Tattvamasi. Therefore, I tell you, it is Lakshana and it is Bhagat Tyaga Lakshana. It is not Jahad Lakshana or Ajahad Lakshana. It is Bhagat Tyaga Lakshana. One part has to be left. That's the it means, and it is not you, the body, but the body part has to be left. Bhagat
Yes.
Tyaga, and that Lakshana has been just applicable there. That's why it is called.
Yes,
It
sir.
is Bhalakshana. It is pure example of Bhagat Tyaga Lakshana.
Yes, yes.
And it is a nice paper. He has tried to show the identity between the Atman and the Brahman in a very nice way. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Srivastav, sir. Well, we have 3 more participants today. If somebody has a pinpointed question, we can wait for 1-2 minutes. Okay, we can go for that. Any pinpointed question? Anybody? I don't find anybody having any question. Well, we should move to the second speaker now.